Good morning, Tom.
Good morning.
Tom, when was your first Maccabi?
I first went to the Maccabi in 1969.
And what do you remember about it?
To me, the 18th Maccabi, the Maccabi that I went to the first time, was the feeling that I got marching into the stadium, full of 50,000, or not, I don't know exactly how many, but almost 50,000 spectators, and it was just such a warm and fuzzy feeling, and it's something that's bound me to Maccabi ever since.
And what was your capacity?
I went in 1969 at the 8th Maccabi. We were a small team of about 55 people, and I went as the official travel agent for the team.
And have you been to every Maccabi since?
I've been to every Maccabi since then, with the exception of 1973, and I had to miss that because we had some children born during that year.
So as a travel agent, you weren't exactly part of the Maccabi team from Australia. When did you actually become an official team member of Australian Maccabi?
Yeah, in 1985, I actually was a member of the team, and my role there was as section manager for the men's basketball team, and I'm happy to say that we performed our best then. I think we came 6th in the competition.
And did you ever at any time get any medals from the basketball?
No, unfortunately, so far no.
My understanding, Tom, is you've never actually competed in the Maccabi. Had you had the opportunity to do so, what would have been your chosen sport?
No question, football. Love my football, and that's soccer to those who understand football.
Did you ever apply to or try to get into one of the teams?
No, but soccer wasn't a sport, or football wasn't a sport on the Maccabi scene in Australia till well after my playing days were over.
I'm not sure whether we covered this, but when you went with the basketballers, what was your role?
I was the section manager of the men's basketball team, and we all stayed together as a whole Australian delegation then in, I think it was the Country Club Hotel.
Now, you've been to a lot of Maccabias. The lowlight is obvious to everybody who remembers 1997, but what was your personal highlight?
I think the highlight for me of a Maccabi is clearly when you are in a stadium and they sing the Hatikva, and you've got 50,000 people who all standing up singing the Hatikva. It actually brings tears to my eyes every time.
Tom, you're head of delegation. Last month you visited Israel in that role, and obviously on the table would have been discussions about how the current global economic crisis is impacting on the Maccabi itself. Can you tell us anything about that?
I think that from a numbers point of view, we in Australia are affected more than any other country, and the reason for that is that in addition to the standard global situation, the impact of the US dollar and its value against the Australian dollar means it's a double dip as far as we're concerned. For most other countries, whether they're in euros or US dollars, there hasn't been as great an impact as for costs and so on and so forth. The numbers are well in excess. Most of the other countries have got increased numbers, and we ourselves will be close to our last Maccabi participation, with close to 500 people still in the team.
Tom, following the 1997 bridge disaster, there were long-term ramifications with your relations with other Maccabi organizations who at the time Maccabi Australia felt were a little bit lacking in their support. Have these differences been patched up?
Yes, they have, and I think the best thing that ever happened was during the last Maccabi in 2005, when Australia sent its record numbers of in excess of 535 people to Israel, and at the head of the team, the families of the 4 victims marched into the stadium and were met by a standing crowd ovation. I think that was that was the start of the real rebuild of the relationship, and ever since then we've been really welcomed back into the Maccabi global family.
Tell us about that 2001 Maccabi, because that was the time that Intifada was on, and there was...
Not to be confused, the families went in 2005. In 2001, yeah. Australia went to Israel as the first Maccabiya after the bridge tragedy, and the opening ceremony was at the Teddy Stadium in Jerusalem. We sent a small team to Israel because that was an on-off games because of the Intifada, and at that time we didn't send juniors, and it was a very proud moment for the Aussies that went to be able to show their solidarity with not just the Maccabiya but with the State of Israel.
What sort of reception did the Australian team get?
The Australian team always gets a very loud and welcome reception. For the Israelis, it was showing that the green and gold was back in Israel after the bridge, and there were still a lot of people who were hesitant about us going and in fact us participating, but we'd already resolved most of the compensation, if not all of the compensation claims by then, with the help of the Maccabi World Union and of course the Israeli government. And we had to go back because for some people it was part of their own healing process.
There's a much contact, Tom, with members of the Australian community who have made Aliyah to Israel.
They always come out of the woodwork when it comes time to the Maccabiya. Even when we were in Israel in May, we caught up again with Danny Hakim, who was a previous Maccabiya participant in karate, and he's involving himself in sport in Israel with his various activities, and maybe even will have a role for him to play there. Other people, yes. In fact, this time we were looking for some medical assistance for some of our team members when they're going to stay up in Haifa, and I called on an old contact of mine who made Aliyah to Israel nearly 35 years ago, and he's helped me find a doctor who will assist our medical team. So yeah, the Australian expats, if you like, they'll be there to support our team.
And finally, Tom, what does the Maccabiya and Maccabi itself mean to you?
My wife always says to me, Maccabi and Maccabiya is my second family. Sometimes she queries which one comes first. But to me it's a life, to me it's a lifestyle. Maccabi has provided me with wonderful opportunities to meet people from all around the world and to give something back in administration to the Australian community, to the global Jewish community, and I guess I'm doing my part to ensure Jewish continuity through my involvement with it.
Thank you very much, Tom.
You're welcome.